Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. So a Texas cowboy moved to Wyoming, and one of the first things he did, he found the local watering hole, and he comes in and he sits down at the bar and he orders 3 Budweisers. And the bartender said, 3? Well, you want them one at a time, because if I pour them now, they're going to get flat. And he said, no, this is what I need. So he poured him the 3 beers, and the bartender said, why do you do it this way? And he said, well, I have one brother that's an airborne ranger, another brother that's a Navy SEAL. And since we left Texas, this is what we do. We just hold each other in our hearts as we drink a beer together. And the bartender was really moved by that. And so that became the custom. And over the next few weeks, the guy would come in, order his 3 beers, and the guy would tip his hat. One night he came in and he ordered 2 beers. Well, and the bartender didn't quite know what to say, but he eventually said, well, I don't want to intrude upon your grief, but just want to offer my condolences. Which brother died? And he said, oh, no, it's not that at all. He said, my wife and I joined the Baptist church, and I don't drink anymore, but my brothers, they do. So. Thank you, Lyle, for that joke. That was the one that Lyle said to me. Isn't that good? So today I'm talking about what is good enough. That was good enough for him, being in alignment with his Baptist principles to do that. So really, this is an interesting question. What is good enough? Because there's a paradox here. And I'm going to spend some time talking about paradox itself and how this works is that in a way, this feeling of I need to get better can be very positive. It's a good motivator. We've all experienced that, right? Like we want to get better. But it can also become a trap where we're never good enough. I've been working out with this little, oh, can't you tell? I've been working out with this little, he would hate me saying he's little. He is only about this tall, but he's like this wide. He's a bodybuilder. His name is Luis Torres, and I share with him sometimes when I'm trying to distract him from making me do torturous things to my body by talking about the sermon I'm working on. And I talked about this idea, and he said, and he's from Spain. He said, it's never good enough, never. And that you can see that really drives him to always want to be better. And how many of you have had that experience of never good enough? Yeah, most of us have had at least some moments of that. Some of us are driven by that feeling of never being good enough. So today what I hope to do is offer some teaching, some spiritual teaching, and maybe even some tools and practice that will help us find the balance between knowing that we're good enough just as we are and wanting to continue to grow and evolve and get better. Sometimes I think we have a fear that if we tell ourselves we're good enough, we'll slack off. And maybe we will. But sometimes I believe that hyper-perfectionist voice in our head is like a whip. And it may be spurring us to greater achievement in the world, but at what cost to our heart and our soul and to our sense of knowing how loved we are by God. So where does this stuff come from, this idea of not good enough? Well, I believe it comes from our childhood beliefs. My friend Kathy Hearn is an amazing New Thought minister and teacher, and she says that false beliefs are formed by a child's mind in response to adult situations. If you've been a child of divorce or if you've gone through divorce, you know that the children will invariably believe it's their fault. There is something in the child's psyche that it's kind of beautifully egocentric. Just thinks that the world revolves around them. And we did that as children, things that happened that we really didn't fully understand, and we didn't understand what was going on or what all of the implications of it were, but we made up a story about it. And often that story involved us being lacking in some way. And we've carried that with us through our adult. Bruce Lipton says that the first 6 years of a child's life, there are no filters. We're just taking in the stories of the family and of the culture. So sometimes it's just our own misperception of reality that we carry with us. Those are our false beliefs that tell us we're not good enough. And sometimes I believe we're carrying things for our family. They're unconscious family loyalties. Speaking with a dear friend of mine this week, and she was sharing that her mother was the middle of 3 daughters, and the first was a great talent, and the youngest was a great beauty, and that her mom spent her whole life trying to be more than she was. And my friend was somehow carrying that energy of never good enough sometimes. So what do we do? How do we apply some spiritual truth to this universal issue of our own self-criticism? How can we find that balance of trusting that who I am is enough? Well, I'm going to introduce a concept to you. Maybe many of you know it. If you've been around this teaching, you may understand. We're talking about the absolute and the relative. In the absolute truth, you are perfect, whole, and complete. You never need to change a thing, baby. You got it. Because you are an expression of the life of God. And all of this stuff that you would tell yourself stories about why you're not good enough, your soul knows nothing about it. Who you are is the delight of God's own being. In the relative, we're very aware that we fail sometimes, that we struggle sometimes. There's a paradox at work here, that we are perfect and we got to get better. In the Hasidic tradition, in some of the Hasidic traditions in Orthodox Judaism, as the young men are studying spiritual teaching and truth, they celebrate when they arrive at the paradox. That there are 2 absolute truths that are in direct opposition to each other, existing in the same moment. Because they have a deep understanding of this. All spiritual truth resolves itself in paradox. Sometimes it's a result of a polarity. My friend Cindy Wigglesworth taught me this beautiful tool called polarity management. Like, here's an example of that. Which is better for living? Breathing in or breathing out? Which is better? Yeah, you get it. You need both. Sometimes it's just a both and. Here in human world, we need these 2 things, and we can't ever get rid of one or the other. It's 2 beautifully paired opposites of a whole. But what I'm talking about with the absolute and the relative is not quite that. I'm more talking about perspective. That from the spiritual perspective, you are perfect, whole, and complete. You don't change a thing. You're never going to become more of an expression of the divine than you are in this moment. This is the spiritual truth. There's nothing you could do to be more loved by God than you are. It's simply the fact of reality. There's one presence, one power, revealing itself in infinite expressions, and you are one. And you can never be separate from the love of God. This is a mystical awareness. You know, sometimes I say that we're a Christian church with a Hindu soul. And what I mean by that is that that's a deep understanding, usually in Eastern traditions, of this oneness, this idea that beneath the illusion of separation, we are one with everything. I think I shared it last week, I don't remember, but there's a James Taylor lyric that somebody just sent me, that there is a river beneath our feet flowing home. We are a part of that. We've never been separate. This is the absolute truth. And yet, in the relative reality of incarnate human experience, oh my gosh, do we got to get better? Do we have things to heal and release? And your work, and here's your assignment, there are 2 things that I think are vital, and just so happens we have them here in our church. How about that? Study and some kind of a healing modality. I think you need both. The mind needs to understand the concepts of oneness, of our inseparability from God's love. And so we have to study, we find a teacher, we take classes, we offer beautiful teachings here at Unity. Sunday morning you're getting some, Wednesday evening you're getting some, but go a little deeper. Go check out our bookstore, ask around. There are some great books. You can begin to study these teachings that we call metaphysics or New Thought philosophy. that will show you in your mind. The mind is where we begin. We begin to get a concept that it can be different. My reality, I am more than I thought, and here are the philosophical underpinnings. But the mind alone won't get you there. Your heart has to be healed. And there are many modalities of healing the heart of its false perceptions and beliefs. Sheila Gautreaux does the radical forgiveness work, amazingly powerful tool. We offer spiritual counseling here. We do affirmative prayer and meditation. All of these are practices, therapy. I'm a believer in it. Finding ways that we can begin to move the heart to a greater awareness of oneness. And in the relative, we have work to do. You may have even heard that phrase about someone. We use it around here in this community a lot, like, well, he's really done his work. Have you heard that? What does that mean? That means they have done this work of both study and healing. That's what we're talking about. I like to share stories that illustrate this sometimes usually from the Jewish or Christian tradition, sometimes from other religious traditions, or even, fairy tales sometimes, wherever I find them. But today I did want to go to the Bible. There's a beautiful story in the Hebrew Bible, what in Christianity we often call the Old Testament. Elisha the prophet. Elisha was the heir of Elijah. Elijah is one of the two souls, I believe, they didn't die physically in the Bible. They were taken up into heaven. Elisha through a whirlwind. Elijah. But before he was whirled up, he named Elisha as his successor. You've heard this idea of passing the mantle. You know what it comes from this story. When God told Elijah that Elisha was to be his successor, he took his own cloak and put it around his shoulders. It was symbolic, and that's what we mean by passing the mantle. Well, when that happened, Elisha said, I want a double portion of your gift and your calling. And so, at the time, the prophets were not the tellers of the future that we sometimes think about prophecy being, but what it actually was, they were the conscience of the people. They were the voice of social justice to the people. They told them when they were off the mark. And they were also considered leaders and healers and workers of miracles. I often say when I'm teaching a miracle story, I'm not concerned whether this factually happened or not. It really has no bearing on what I want to offer to you from it. There's a principle that is being demonstrated by the story. So, here's the story. There was a widow, and one day she saw the prophet Elisha, and she called out to him. She said, Sir, your servant, my husband, was killed in the army. And now our creditors are coming to take my sons to pay our debt. And I need help. Elisha the prophet said to her, What do you have? And she said, All I have. I only have a small container of olive oil in our house. And Elisha instructed her to send her sons and to go to every neighbor and borrow as many empty vessels, jars, pots as she could from the neighbors, then to gather in the home, close the door, and pour from her vessel into the other jars. She did this, and every time she tipped the container up to pour into the jar, the flow continued until that jar was full. They would bring another, and it continued. It was a miracle. And then the last drop filled the last container. She went back to the prophet, and he said, Now, sell this oil to pay your debt. And she did. In the metaphysics of this story, there are a couple things that are quite important. When she came to the emissary of God with her problem, her eye was on the problem. She was going to lose her sons. And instead of simply solving the problem, and I'm sure that Elisha probably had resources. He was a leader in the community. He was beloved of the people. I'm sure he could have worked a deal out with the creditor, but that would have not grown her in her awareness. And so what he said, and he responded to her request for help with a question. What do you have? This is vitally important. Whatever your struggle is, whatever the thing is that you're being asked to grow through, If God just swooped down and rescued you with a miracle story, would you expand into more of who you are? But if instead you use what you have and grow it, not only do you get the experience of having walked through the struggle, but you are bigger and you're more. There's a song lyric that says, if it all just happened overnight, you would never know what it means. And if it all just happened overnight, you wouldn't learn to believe in that which you cannot see. You can't see right now how you're going to get to the other side of your problem. You can't see who you are that needs to, the mind that is in you that you have not yet access to, but reveal the solution to make you walk through it. You haven't seen it yet. But you trust that it begins with what you have. And you step out in faith and you pour the oil. The last thing metaphysically I want to tell you about this story is that the jars, the empty vessels, they represent consciousness. That the infinite is forever revealing its nature in and through your life, but you can only hold as much as you can hold. Right now, all of the blessings of the universe are given to you. It is your divine right of inheritance by being a child of God, by being an expression of the nature. There is no separation. All abundance, all health, all well-being, all freedom is already yours in the absolute. Why don't you experience it in the relative? Because your container isn't big enough yet. You have to find a way to expand your consciousness of good, to hold more of the good that not only is given to you, but is you. This is the practice. Study, pray, heal, find someone to talk with about it, and to begin to move into a greater awareness of who you are. You are the way. There's not some book that's going to be handed to you that's going to solve it for you. No preacher sitting up here on a Sunday morning got your answers. It's within you. There's a song that I love the music of Ricky Byers and El Agape. It's an old one from when she first started writing music at that community in California. And it says, open your heart, let the Lord have its own way. Open your heart, let the Lord have its own way. It's called the Light Chant. And the bridge in that says, we are the light. We are the way. When we talk about thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, it's not just going to descend out of the sky. It's going to come through you and through me. You are the way. So as I complete this message today there are two ways. Everything is about twos today. I have really two messages for you. If you struggle beneath the weight of your own self-criticism, your overly hyper-awareness of your faults and your failings, my message to you is you're good enough, just as you are. You know, there are two kinds of people in the world. There are those who categorize everyone into two groups and those who don't. But there are two kinds of people in the world. There are those who are aware, maybe overly aware of their shortcomings, and those who are not. So if you are unaware of your shortcomings, I invite you to ask your wife or your sister. See, sometimes we have, there's a mechanism that comes up. We all have family of origin shame. We just do. Every one of us. And because we don't want anyone to see it, we will build walls around it. And sometimes we begin to forget that there's anything behind that wall too. You know, the narcissist, their only two motivators are to avoid shame and to receive praise. So the ability to own your mess is the only way it ever is going to become your message. You've got to find a way to get honest about it. When I was getting sober in the 12 steps, I knew about these 4th and 5th steps. They are really scary for a new person. You make a fearless and thorough moral inventory in the 4th step. You write down everything you've done. And in the 5th step, you have to tell somebody. I know. People are just going to want to quit. They're going to want to keep drinking rather than go to those 12-step meetings, I tell you. But I did. I drank over that shame for a long time. I couldn't bear it. And my heart was racing when I did my first 5th step. And my little sweet sponsor, she just said, I've done worse. Or she would say, Michael, it's so human. I understand. And she said, part of the deal is the sponsor is supposed to, it's kind of old language, but they enumerate your character defects for you, I know. And she said, well, immediately, like early on in the process, she said, I can tell one of your biggest character defects is that you're a perfectionist. And I said, no, it can't be. I've never done anything perfect my entire life. And she just went, yeah. And that brings me to the other side. If you're struggling under the weight of your own criticism, of your own feeling of unworthiness and lack of perfection, you are good enough. We are going to be launching a beautiful 7-week program here next month. It's called Adventures in Faith, Discover the Power Within You. We're going to be working with a New Thought classic by Eric Butterworth, Discover the Power Within You. And we're going to be doing Sunday lessons. We're going to be doing Wednesday experiences. We're going to go deep into this material. And the thing I want to really have you think about is joining one of the small groups. Because if you can form true community with people that really get to see you, and you get to see them, in the Zen tradition, they talk about opening the kimono. No, we're not doing that. Metaphorically. Appropriateness will be observed in all these groups, but just a chance to share who you truly are, to bring all of who you are into community. It healed me. I learned to accept myself as human so that I could really access my divinity, and that's what's here for you as well. There is something happening in this community. There is a vibrancy and an electricity of possibility. I feel it. And it's not happening to you, it's happening through you. I love you. God bless you. Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.